Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mobardi. Today is Thursday, May 16th, and on the show today, we're going to be talking about the Boston Celtics, who just eliminated the Cleveland Cavaliers from the postseason, officially advanced to yet another conference finals. I believe it is their sixth in the past 8 seasons with Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. So we're going to be talking about Game 5 and sort of the aftermath here for the Cleveland Cavaliers, where we already have a little bit of an onslaught of different rumors that are coming out about potential changes in Cleveland. So we're going to be diving into that. We are also going to be touching on the Dallas Mavericks winning their Game 5 matchup against the Oklahoma City Thunder. Luka's new approach, as it was made a very big deal about him not complaining with the officiating, and he ended up putting in one of his best playoff performances so far this postseason. Then in the final couple segments, we're going to be talking some NFL. The schedule, the entire 2024 schedule was released for the league last night. So we're going to be talking about the different aspects of that, which teams have the hardest strength of schedule, the key matchups in the year, and a little bit of talk as well about the decisions the NFL has made in terms of using streaming platforms for some of their games. And finally, we're going to be capping off the show with a little bit of a rapid-fire tier set for the various NFL teams headed into next season. But before we get into the show, remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Use the comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports. And if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker. That is gsmcpodcast.net. Anything would be greatly appreciated. Starting off the show today, though, want to talk about the Boston Celtics, who are officially moving on to the next round. They beat the Cleveland Cavaliers, a very shorthanded Cavaliers team, 113-98 in their Game 5 matchup. We saw it in Game 4. Donovan Mitchell unable to go. He was dealing with a calf strain. And then in this next game, we saw it was more than just Donovan Mitchell, where Caris LeVert, who had also been a key player for the Cavaliers through their first couple rounds, he was out as well. And there really was no excuse for the Celtics to come up short. Now, credit the Cavaliers, they were fighting their way into this game, and it was because of a couple key performances. The first that I want to highlight is Evan Mobley, because I do feel like as we get into this conversation around where the Cavaliers go from here, we saw the aggressive version of Evan Mobley. He knew that he needed to step up in this instance, and he definitely did so. Scored 33 points, smashing his career high in the playoffs. Took 24 shots, and again, that level of aggression was very much needed from him. And I thought that he did a really good job continuing to show that, in an offense where there is more spacing around him, he can do maybe a little bit more work under the basket than he gets credit for a lot of the time. Again, we've talked about this at length dating back to the Orlando series, especially once Jarrett Allen was ruled out with the rib injury. The fact that he is just so good at working with space in terms of his teammates are driving, he positions himself in the right spots to sort of get himself open looks at the rim, and I thought that was a lot of what he was doing last night as well as a part of his performance. So that was definitely at least one thing that the Cavaliers fans can sort of come out of this win with. We also saw Marcus Morris sort of put in a crazy performance that was definitely not expected. Marcus Morris, he ends up scoring 25 points, 10 of 13 from the field, 5 of 6 from 3. Marcus Morris is kind of funny because he, of course, was a Boston Celtic for a handful of years, and it definitely, at least personally, myself as a Celtics fan, I do remember this version of Marcus Morris where every once in a while he would get red hot, and when he was maybe a little bit on a less established team. He was on the Celtics as they were sort of rebuilding during those Isaiah Thomas years, and yes, they were competitive, and he was with the Celtics for even a little bit of stretch into when they started being a prominent conference finals team, but felt like at that point it was definitely a much younger Celtics core, and he felt like he deserved a larger opportunity. And some of the ball stopping with him, and again, I don't mean to, dump on Marcus Morris by any means. I'm just saying that this is something that we've seen from him in the past, at least as a Celtics fan. See him be able to take over games individually. The consistency of it wasn't always there, but he was phenomenal last night. And it's not like the Celtics were just leaving him wide open, which is something that we've seen the Celtics do in a defensive, schematic strategy to let other players hurt them. This was Marcus Morris just pulling up over everybody. He was backing players down, working in the mid-range, and he was just automatic last night. So, give him his credit. It was the first time he scored 25 points since March of 2022. But ultimately, Cavaliers just did not have enough firepower. And again, I do want to go more in depth into the Cavaliers situation as this show progresses, but for now we will sort of stick to the Boston Celtics, where it definitely wasn't, the most convincing performance necessarily, given the fact that the Cavaliers were as shorthanded as they were, and it sort of took a while, it felt like, specifically for Jayson Tatum to work up. Again, the common theme, it seems like, of the past couple days is talking about the aggression level of some of these stars, where it felt like for a lot of the game, both Tatum and Brown weren't necessarily, working to their spots, and yet they were able to carry the lead through the majority of the game. They were in large part carried by Derek White in that first quarter, but then he got a little bit more quiet. And this was also, and we'll get into Tatum momentarily, but this was a very big bounce back game for Al Horford, who had really been struggling the past couple games. We saw that he was 0 for 10 from 3 over the past two. I talked about this before, the fact that Evan Mobley just did not respect his perimeter shot, and it seemed like Al didn't even necessarily trust himself all too much, and Mobley was just able to cause havoc at the rim. But Horford definitely found his shooting stroke a little bit more last night. 6 of 13 from 3, can't have any complaints there. But it wasn't just that. He was making some of these hustle plays to track down loose balls. I thought that he had a couple really nice defensive possessions. Now, granted, he still, when it came to Darius Garland, who also struggled in this game, but again, we're going to continue the Cavaliers conversation about this a little bit more in the next segment, but he was able to sort of benefit from guarding a lot of Dean Wade, who definitely, get after the win the Cavaliers pulled off in the middle of the season, where they came back down 20 points in the fourth quarter. Dean Wade did sort of have at least this threat of being something, but was just pretty ineffective, and the fact that he was in the starting lineup for the Cavaliers just sort of goes to show that this Cavs team was just so run down from an injury standpoint. Dean Wade was a game low minus 27 in this game. So, regardless though, I thought that Horford had a much better contribution to this game. Felt like they legitimately needed him to win it. He had some big shots in the fourth quarter as well, but it was a little bit interesting where, texting with other Celtics fans, it was a little bit of a Jekyll Hyde situation where he would have these bursts where he looked incredible, and then he'd come back the other way and definitely look like the older version of himself. So this is just something that I continue to highlight in terms of the Celtics are going to need Kristaps Porzingis to win an NBA championship, but Al Horford is, just as good of a professional as you can get. He is reliable, at least in these limited minutes, and, in this game too, ended up playing 35, so they definitely leaned on him heavily in this game. We saw that in Game 4, they were sort of going in favor of maybe a little bit more Luke Cornett minutes than usual, and I wasn't a huge fan of that personally. I know that Evan Mobley must have been a good fan of it, because I mentioned this in the fourth quarter of game 1, where Evan Mobley seemed to really relish that matchup. And, again, from a Cavaliers standpoint, do have to be encouraged that Mobley, it did seem like, and this was something, again, dating back to the Orlando series, where you saw him wanting to create more for himself. And in this instance, it seemed like that was a matchup that he saw another big that he felt confident he was going to be able to go at, and he did so in a very successful way. So I definitely, Mobley, I think, boosted his stock over the course of these, especially last few games in the series here. And it's definitely going to be a part of the conversation in terms of what the offseason ahead looks like for the Cavaliers. It was already sort of known that Evan Mobley was a building block, but there were some questions surrounding him, and I still think the fit with him and Jarrett Allen is a little bit of a question mark. But Mobley is somebody that Cavaliers fans should definitely be feeling good about coming out of this series. And it is unfortunate that they sort of had to deal with this and see their season end without a fully healthy group, because you don't necessarily get all of the answers that you were hoping for, because of the fact that we didn't really get to see specifically, I'm going to point to the 4, big pieces for the Cavaliers in Garland, Mitchell, Allen, and Mobley. We didn't get to see them all play together necessarily. So that does sort of add a little bit more questions about, you don't have these definitive answers headed into the offseason. But final notes here on the Celtics. Did seem like Jayson Tatum, about halfway through that third quarter, is when he started putting his foot down and going into a little bit more of an aggressor mode. I thought that he was really impactful yet again. And again, for a superstar player in Jayson Tatum, who doesn't necessarily get a ton of media attention because of the fact that there are all of these other players, and his type of superstardom doesn't necessarily look the same as a Jalen Brunson, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Anthony Edwards, any of these loud performances. Tatum, it does feel like he is best when he flies under the radar, because he plays incredible defense. He is a tremendous rebounder, and he just makes the right decision every single time facing these multiple defenders. And, all-stars do get extra attention, so that's definitely not an excuse, but it's the fact that that Jayson Tatum specifically does make the right plays in these instances where some of his counting stats might not be quite as tremendous, but regardless, he still helps the Celtics contribute to winning. And, the Celtics move on. This isn't very much of a surprise. Draymond Green was on TNT at halftime, or it was after the game, and said, frankly, nobody cares that the Celtics are back in the conference finals, which, as much as coming from Draymond, you do kind of want to react as if, well, here's Draymond talking again after not even making the playoffs. But he does have a little bit of a point, where we've seen this with the Celtics before. It was never about making just the conference finals. We need to see them take that next step, and here they are again with a prime opportunity to be able to take advantage of this. And no, they haven't necessarily had the most difficult level of competition up to this point, but losing Kristaps Porzingis was a big deal in my eyes, and yet since then they've only lost one game. Now, obviously, they're also playing injured rosters on the other end, but to lose your, third option like that, and really haven't seen them stagger all that much, and having to lean on Al Horford as much as they do, and shortening up of their bench, I just feel like it's one of those things. It's kind of hard to give the Celtics credit because they've been in this position so many times, but I don't believe that there are many teams for that matter, that could be able to withstand a loss like that and really not fall off whatsoever. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. we are going to dive more into the conversation about the Cleveland Cavaliers because of the fact that this morning we already got all types of different rumors about the different offseason potentials for this roster. So we're going to answer questions about where Donovan Mitchell could end up, whether or not they think that they can run this back with the same group, what JB Bickerstaff's job security looks like, all of that and more. But first, we are going to be taking a quick break, and we will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Getting my way in to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news if it's some losing shit. A stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just talked about the Celtics' perspective of advancing to the conference finals, but now want to switch to the other side a little bit, talking about the Cleveland Cavaliers and their offseason ahead, because we had a lot of different rumors sort of come up within the first 12 hours of the Cavaliers being eliminated from the playoffs that does make for a very interesting conversation about the offseason ahead for the Cavaliers. And truthfully, none of the individual headlines were all that surprising, but the fact that JB Bickerstaff's job was, quote, in jeopardy just hours after the game, and I do understand what the concern is there, but again, the speed of which all of this came out was really surprising to me, that there is definitely going to be a shakeup ahead for the Cleveland Cavaliers. So the conversations start around Donovan Mitchell and how happy he is in Cleveland. There have been rumblings for months now that if the Cavaliers were going to offer an extension, it seems like Mitchell would not be willing to commit to them long term. And I think that that was sort of built up even a little bit more over the course of this series, where there was a report that just came out that Mitchell was frustrated by the maturity level of some of his teammates and the lack of focus there. Now, and I thought that Mitchell, especially if you look back to Game 7 of the Orlando Magic series, I thought that Mitchell did a really good job of showing himself to be a leader. He sort of took on that extra role the way that he had Garland sort of under his wing, trying to build his confidence back up when he was really struggling. And unfortunately for the Cavaliers, we had glimpses of Darius Garland, especially in the second half of Game 4, where he was able to, produce some more. But even still, it was a very inefficient postseason here for Darius Garland. And I guess that for as much as it was nice to see Mitchell kind of be willing to be this leader on the team, it seems like he was frustrated with the extent that he had to go to be that leader. So that's not a great sign for them. And we already knew that there were going to be teams sort of lining up at the door to try and make some deals in order to bring in Donovan Mitchell. Brian Windhorst reported that the Lakers and Nets already have, quote, offers ready in order to bring him in. I think Shams Charania said that the Heat could be another team, or it was Zach Lowe actually, who said that the Heat could be another team that could potentially make a move at Donovan Mitchell. And I think that this does make sense, honestly, from all ends. The Cavaliers were sort of similar to the Atlanta Hawks when the Hawks made their run to the conference finals in 2021, where I feel like both of these teams sort of jumped the gun in terms of trying to force their way into contention. And during the time where Donovan Mitchell was traded, they had the best package that was out there in order to make a move, and they jumped on the opportunity, and they thought that that was something that could help lead them to contention. But the reality is the fit just wasn't necessarily there. We're not playing franchise mode in NBA 2K. It seems like they were just very reductive in terms of Garland and Mitchell have very similar skill sets. Both are on the ball players. Allen and Mobley aren't a great fit with one another. Neither one of them necessarily great at spacing the floor. Both operate in the paint, and it just seems like it didn't necessarily make all that much sense. And now for the Cavaliers, if they're not willing to, or if Donovan Mitchell isn't willing to play ball with them and sign an extension, I think it only makes sense for them to make that move. And even if they do convince him to stay in Cleveland, it sounds like Darius Garland's camp is potentially looking to request a trade if Mitchell were to be re-signed. So it's kind of a mess there in Cleveland. Now, they still have all of these assets to make a bunch of different deals work, and I don't expect them to be, really much worse than they were this past season. I just think they are going to look different, and I feel like they sort of have to pick two of their players from Mitchell and Garland, one of them, Mobley and Allen, one of them, and sort of figure out how to make this thing work around the edges, because it just has not been a successful experiment up to this point. And a lot of people are sort of questioning JB Bickerstaff's ability to make this all work. I feel like it is a little bit unfair for JB Bickerstaff, and I'm not going to say that he's a bona fide star of a head coach, but I did think that the way that Cleveland battled in both games 4 and 5 with all of the injuries that occurred was pretty I think it was a good sign for him. And you look at the open market right now in terms of available head coaches, it's not like there is a ton of solidified options out there. So I personally believe JB Bickerstaff may have done enough to keep his job at least for the next year, see what this next iteration of the Cavaliers is going to look with, because I think that there were real flaws with the roster that they rolled out this past season. And again, I'm sure there are Cavaliers fans out there who have been watching more intently Bickerstaff's decisions throughout the course of the year, but I feel like, again, in this big moment, last year you can definitely point to him more so, and if that is, the decision. I'm curious what the front office looks like, because this is something we talked about yesterday as well in terms of the Atlanta Hawks and their decision to make the trade for DeJounte Murray. And now they're at a point where it is a new front office, so they don't have to, or new general manager at least, so they don't have to worry about, making sure that move looked okay, because the general manager who made that trade is already gone. So I am not 100% sure in terms of the Cavaliers if they have, it looks like he is still the same one. Mike Gansey is what I'm looking at here off of at least a quick Google search here, but seems that he's still there. Maybe he feels like he has to protect his job a little bit in terms of he made the Mitchell trade, it didn't work out, and he has to sort of point the finger at somebody else. But I feel like Bickerstaff deserves another chance, but definitely let me know in the comments section what your thoughts are. I don't feel extremely strongly one way or another, and we will see. Again, we had, reports coming out within an hour after the game wrapped up that Bickerstaff's job is, quote, in jeopardy. So we're going to have a decision shortly on that one. And for the Cavaliers as a whole here, I just feel like in general, we understand the individual talent levels of the four main players that they have on their roster, but I really struggle to see necessarily what was going to change if there was a coach. Like, you would have maybe liked to see. The reality is Donovan Mitchell was never going to change his game for the unprovens of the rest of the team. So it's if Darius Garland could end up being more of an off-the-ball player, but he was an ascending star when he was selected to his first All-Star team in 2021-22, and since then we have seen his numbers dip and his efficiency as well, because he just wasn't able to, somebody again who is typically used to having the ball in his own hands, he wasn't getting the types of opportunities he was expecting, and I just feel like I can't say again fully it was a mistake to try and make the move for Donovan Mitchell, and especially we'll have to see what the potential return looks like for him in a trade package, but ultimately, I just never really loved the fit to begin with. Now, there was also the sort of minor storyline that came out of Game 3 or Game 4, I'm blanking on which one it was. I think it was Game 4 actually, where LeBron James was in attendance and he was sitting courtside, and a lot of people were sort of pointing to the fact of what's he doing in Cleveland right now. Could this mean that he could potentially make a return? That would definitely be interesting, and if LeBron were interested in that, I feel like it would probably make more sense for the Cavaliers to lean more in the direction of getting Donovan Mitchell to re-sign. And, if you're going to go for it with LeBron James once again, you probably want the more, championship-ready players to date. And Darius Garland, for as much as I do like him, I feel like it would probably make sense to ship him off in that case. But again, a whole bunch of different factors baked into this. Let me know what you think the Cavaliers should do in the offseason. But we are going to move off of this for now, and when we come back on the other side of this break, we are going to be talking about the Dallas Mavericks, who won their Game 5 matchup against the Oklahoma City Thunder to retake the series advantage. Stick with us, and we will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We are now going to be moving on to the other game that took place last night, where we saw the Dallas Mavericks able to lead their way to victory against the Oklahoma City Thunder. Storyline coming into this game, which is a little bit ridiculous, but at the same time did sort of play out in real time, was the fact that Luka Doncic had this new sort of approach to the game where he wanted to make sure that he was spending less time talking to the referees and the officials, and this is something that Luka has always definitely had the reputation of somebody who can be a little loud in terms of voicing his displeasure with the officiating, but it seemed like during the playoffs, and part of the sort of theories around it was the fact that he was dealing with this injury anyways, and that already sort of had him frustrated, and he almost expected the referees to be a little bit more forgiving to him because he was dealing with these injuries, and it was just leading to, frankly, a little bit of nonsense in terms of him really going at the referees on a consistent basis, and a lot of people were getting fed up with it, but he was looking to change his approach heading into this game, and he ended up putting up one of his best performances so far of the postseason. I would argue, personally, the best that he's looked yet. 31 points, 11 assists, 10 rebounds. Finally shot well again from the field, 12 of 22, 5 of 11 shooting splits. So definitely a good sign for Dallas. And early on in the game, they did report at least that if this were a regular season scenario, Luka would probably be sidelined for at least 2 weeks with this knee injury that he's dealing with, but he is sort of working through it. And I thought that last night he did move pretty well, all things considered. We've seen him, it hasn't necessarily been a linear situation with him where we've seen him sort of have his ups and downs in terms of how does he look from a physical standpoint up to this point in the postseason. So I'm definitely not ready to say he is finally past it. This is something he's going to be dealing with for the entirety of the playoff run here, but at least he did look good last night. And, you know, I think that he was the very much needed, you know, offensive creator for this Mavericks team that, again, we are just seeing the development of this defense in real time. And that's what's been getting it done for the Mavericks in the postseason so far, is they are just about completely eliminating the paint and forcing other teams to hit the perimeter shots against them. And that should be a recipe that would be in favor of the Oklahoma City Thunder, considering how well they shot during the regular season. But it just hasn't necessarily been the same case last night, where we see them go 25% from three. It took them a while to get going. I think that Chet Holmgren and his three-point shooting, not that I would blame this much. There are a lot of things you can sort of point the finger to before you point to Chet Holmgren in terms of why the Thunder are down in this series. But that being said, would be definitely a lot nicer to see the Chet Holmgren three-point shot falling, because of the fact that we haven't necessarily, I feel like that would be such a massive piece, and we see it on individual reference or individual points of the games where Derek Lively, especially later in the game, was at least getting pulled out onto the perimeter, which was opening up the paint a little bit more for them. But Chet in this series, he is shooting just 25% from three, and because of that, the Mavericks don't have to necessarily, you know, clear their big men out of the post to go stand by Chet on the perimeter, which would absolutely open up the lane for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who was incredible in this game once again. And I think that some of it's a simpler thing, and, you know, this is somebody who, coming from somebody who has not played in the NBA, and it's not that, you know, complex of an idea, but you see every time Shai is very aware of where the big men on the court are for Dallas, and every time he has an opportunity to get to the rim where the Dallas big man is sort of trailing him, he does so and gets a lot of damage done there, along with the fact that his mid-range shot is just ridiculous how consistent it is. And, you know, definitely viewed as one of, I mean, you know, not just viewed as, but statistically, it is one of the least efficient shots in the NBA, but Shai just doesn't abide by that. And a lot of people, once again, last night sort of coming at Shai for the flopping and such. I just can't stand the discourse that goes on with a lot of NBA fans, but you know, Shai is just about all that is effective right now on the offensive side of the floor for Oklahoma City. And this Dallas defense seems to have really figured them out. You are getting incredible minutes from Derek Lively, where, if you've noticed, he's the one who's closing a lot of these games, which is a little bit of a surprise because Daniel Gafford has been also very solid for them. But we saw the Hack-a-Lively situation after, I believe it was Game 4, and he sort of just beat the case of the Thunder thinking they can get away with just sending him to the free throw line on repeat, where he was very effective from the free throw line after it seemed like he settled in a little bit there. So for the Mavericks, I think that this was good to see that they don't need to necessarily lean extremely heavily on this Luka and Kyrie dynamic. PJ Washington had a couple huge games for them in games 2 through 4 last night. Didn't necessarily have the same shooting touch, scored just 10 points, and it was Luka sort of by himself. Kyrie has definitely been very quiet over the stretch of recent games, and I've praised him a ton for the fact that he does seem a little bit more okay with allowing his entire team to get into the game before he just sort of goes into ISO ball in these situations, which I do stand by. There is going to need to be a time where Kyrie steps up once again, but as long as you're winning, I'm never going to necessarily tear you down in that aspect. And Game 4 probably would have been nice to see him step up a little bit more. Only scored 9 points, but in this game, they didn't necessarily need him to do so, and I thought that this was very encouraging for the Mavericks as a whole. Sort of on the side of the Thunder, I talked about Chet Holmgren, but one of the big stories coming from the Thunder was the fact that they finally pulled the trigger on taking Josh Giddey out of the starting lineup, which is, it's definitely a decision. I think that I wouldn't say it was a must-do move by any means, because you do sort of have the potential of screwing up the dynamics of the team. The TNT crew was hitting on this at halftime as well. Isaiah Joe didn't necessarily seem like he was very hyped up coming into this game, picked up a couple quick fouls. He never necessarily made an impact. And then Giddey coming off the bench, he actually did all right for himself in this game. When he first checked in, it was around the 4-minute mark, I think, left in the first quarter. I was a little bit surprised that when they did so, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was still in the game. I feel like they would maybe be better off trying to stagger the minutes a little bit. But, regardless, Giddey was all right off the bench. Maybe this is the way they decide to move on here through the rest of the postseason. I wouldn't say it necessarily, ignited anything in them, because the rest of the offense, and I don't think it matters who necessarily is in that 5th spot in terms of their starting lineup. There isn't a ton else going for them, and Jalen Williams, the stats haven't been horrible for him, but something I did notice was the difference on his drives, where he was one of the best players this season in terms of attacking the rim and getting himself going on drives. During the regular season, he was shooting something like 50%. It was above that. I can find it right here as I sort of scramble a little bit. But Jalen Williams during the regular season was a very effective player in terms of getting downhill, and we've just seen his shot percentage really drop, where during the regular season he was shooting 53% on his drives, and so far in the postseason we have seen that drop off to 45%. Actually went up after last night, because I think going into it was in the 30s. So again, step in the right direction at least, but it has not been the same version of Jalen Williams that we saw during the regular season, and he's somebody that the Thunder absolutely need in order to sort of overcome their own youth, which is of course a conversation that's going on with this series. we knew that the Thunder at some point were going to run into a little bit of a bump in experience-wise, but who is going to be the player to sort of take them out of it? Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is doing just about everything he can, but he is going to need some assistance, and right now, their number 2 guy during the regular season hasn't necessarily been doing so. Like I mentioned, Chet, I don't think that he's been bad, but the fact that he isn't able to sort of keep the defense quite as honest around the perimeter as they would prefer, and the Mavericks are just clicking defensively. So the Thunder are going to head into an elimination game. They next play on Saturday, so we'll see how that plays out. Dallas is currently favored by 4.5 points on ESPN Bet. They're going to be home. Let me know what your thoughts are for the remainder of this series, but we are going to be taking our next break here, and when we come back on the other end, I have some thoughts on the NFL schedule release, which came out last night. We have the full 2024 slate, so we are going to be diving into that. Stick with us, and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Excuse me. We are now headed into our next segment, and I wanted to talk about the release of the 2024 schedule, where we have the full slate of games for the upcoming season. This was something that was leaked a little bit ahead of time. We now know, though, that the Ravens are going to be headed to Kansas City to face the Chiefs in the first game of the NFL season. That's going to kick off the first Thursday of the year, a rematch of the AFC Championship game. And then what's really interesting is we do have that Brazil game that was talked about for a bit. That is going to be taking place on that Friday between the Green Bay Packers and the Philadelphia Eagles. And it is going to be exclusively streamed on Peacock. So a few thoughts about that game. One, should be a really fun game for the most part anyways. The fact that it's going to be the first game ever in Brazil. And the third thing is that this is the first example we're going to see for the 2024 season in terms of the exclusive streaming platform games, where we have seen Amazon Prime take over as the Thursday Night Football provider, which is going to be the case once again. We're going to be diving into that shortly, but it seems like the NFL was a little bit more willing to, I don't know if there was something behind the scenes in terms of Amazon Prime was willing to pay a little bit more money, but it seems like the quality of games there might actually be a little bit better than what we've seen in recent years. But on NFL.com, they also announced that Amazon Prime Video is going to be streaming a wild card game as well. We saw a similar situation last year where Peacock did so for the game between the Chiefs and the Dolphins in the wild card round. I don't believe that Peacock is getting another playoff game, at least from what I have seen. Let me know if I'm wrong on that matter. Let me know in the comment section, but it seems like Peacock's one game is going to be this Brazil matchup in week 1, but we also have 2 games that are going to be aired on Netflix on Christmas Day. The Chiefs are going to be playing the Steelers, and the Ravens are going to be playing the Texans. So some interesting matchups there. Historic franchises in the Chiefs and the Steelers. Another rematch from the playoffs last year in the divisional round between the Ravens and Texans. But I think that with all of these mutually, exclusive streaming service games, it is kind of unfortunate because it's not ideal for the casual viewer, but at the same time, the numbers last year for Peacock on that playoff game were extremely high, and I do think that it's just something we're going to have to get used to. It's kind of the future of streaming for a lot of these sports, and again, let me know how you feel about it in the comment section, but I don't think that anything is going to change on this front. It seems like from a business perspective, the NFL knows that they can sell off, again, especially with all of the success that the Peacock game had last year. The NFL knows that they can probably continue to drive up the price a little bit on the bidding war for these types of games, and it does make sense, I think, for these streaming platforms as well to carry their end of the bargain because of the fact that they are getting, incredible viewership numbers on these individual games, and if they can sort of hook additional people in for the sake of, keeping their membership, then I understand from the business perspective of both the NFL and these streaming services. We can acknowledge that it does sort of hurt the casual viewer, but fortunately, when has the common person ever really been, the X factor in these types of business deals from big corporations? So just sort of my 2 cents on that. But I wanted to round out the rest of week 1. We have like I mentioned, the primetime matchups, it seems like this year. Now, injuries always play a role in sort of derailing some of these, but I was really thrilled with some of the primetime matchups we got this year. We have the Rams and the Lions facing off on the first Sunday Night Football game of the year. Another playoff rematch, as we saw when the postseason came around last year. Plenty of storylines between these two teams in terms of making the deal for Goff and Stafford, all of the different relationships that are baked into it. It's Stafford going back into Detroit, where there was a little bit of love lost the last time around. I think that at the end of the day, when Stafford, I believe he's going to be a Hall of Famer. Let me know if you disagree with that idea, but I think he's going to be remembered for being in a Lions jersey. I think that Lions fans do still have a lot of respect for him, but right now things are just going to be a little bit contentious, and they are going to want to win every single one of these matchups at a very high intensity level, to say the least. But also in week 1, we have the Jets debuting on Monday Night Football once again with a matchup against the 49ers. Now, if you remember last year, of course, the Jets did play their first game on Monday Night Football, which is where Aaron Rodgers made his very brief Jets debut before suffering the season-ending injury. Now, on the bright side, this game isn't going to be taking place at MetLife, so maybe we get a little bit of a better field for Aaron Rodgers to make his smooth transition into the, Jets culture and everything. But, thought it was interesting that they would decide to go in that direction once again, putting the Jets on the Monday night primetime. But, I wanted to touch a little bit on the strength of schedules, the most difficult ones. It is not a huge surprise that the AFC North sort of dominates the very top of this list, with the Browns, Ravens, and Steelers being the top 3 most difficult schedules for 2024. Now, this strength of schedule is calculated based off of last season's results and the win percentages combined for the teams that they're going to be facing. So, not a perfect stat, but just sort of generally speaking here, all of these teams are at the top because they have to play one another. And the AFC North is, in my eyes, the best division in the league. Let me know if you have any other thoughts on that. But somehow the Bengals avoided the same level of difficulty with their strength of schedule. Now, again, can be a little bit subjective, this stat. For example, the Bengals were last in the division last year, which is why they do have the easiest schedule out of the group. But their wins are probably their record when you look at other teams that are going to have to play them. The Bengals are going to be a much better team this season as long as they have a healthy Joe Burrow. So does sort of show the flaws in the system that is currently calculating this. But rest of the top 10, we have the Packers at 4, and then the Texans, Giants, Bills, Patriots, Jaguars, and Raiders at number 10. Gotta say, as a Patriots fan here, pretty sad about the Patriots having the 8th hardest schedule. Now, I just don't know what the team did to deserve this. They also don't have a bye week until week 14, so definitely could be very rough stuff for the Patriots going here. When we last talked about the over-unders, I believe the Patriots were at 4.5 wins for the season, and I did feel like they could win one more game. Or did they win 3 or 4 last year? I'm kind of blanking off the top of my head, but I thought the Patriots could be a potential over team, but they won 4 games. But when I looked earlier on BetMGM, they are actually sitting at 5.5, so don't feel quite as good about that prediction now. But 4.5, 5 is probably going to be around where they do end up this season. But on the flip side of the conversation surrounding the NFC or the AFC North being at the top of the most difficult strength of schedule because they have to play one another, we saw the NFC South holding 4 out of the 5 easiest schedules for 2024. Goes Saints, Falcons, Panthers, the Bears are in there, and then the Buccaneers in terms of the 5 easiest. So not all too surprising there. Part of what's leading a lot of people to really buy into the Falcons, who can definitely be a good team, but I don't see them as a true Super Bowl contender. And that's going to be what we're sort of diving into in the next segment, is putting these teams into tiers. But sort of just to quickly wrap up here, I want to talk a little bit about some of the primetime matchups. Like I alluded to earlier, the Thursday night slate feels like is much better than it has been in the past. We got some high quality divisional matchups, hopefully, between the Bills and Dolphins, the Niners and the Seahawks, the Bengals and the Ravens, Packers, Lions, and the Rams and the 49ers. We also do have a Sean Payton return to New Orleans with his Broncos team. And then week 17, we're going to have a very interesting matchup. I believe it is the Bears versus the Seahawks. And specifically, seeing Caleb Williams on this big stage late in the year with the Bears potentially making a push for the postseason, definitely going to be something that I am interested in. We're also going to see him on Sunday Night Football in week 2 when he faces off against CJ Stroud in the Texans. I think that should be another really good game as well. But let me know which games you guys are most looking forward to. We're going to be taking our final break here, and when we come back on the other side, I broke each of the NFL teams down into tiers, so we are going to be giving a little bit of a rankings to end off the show here. But stick with us after this quick break, and we will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, and we're headed into our final segment of the day, where just a little bit of a, fun, a little bit of a ridiculous exercise as we are still months away from the beginning of the regular season, but building up on that NFL hype, wanted to make a little bit of a tier system for the different NFL teams. So without further ado, I guess we'll just dive right into it. The tier 1, I have the true Super Bowl contenders, and I have the Chiefs, the Ravens, and the 49ers. Really shouldn't be any surprise here. It sort of seems like during the offseason, some people have soured on the 49ers a little bit. Now, I still think that this year they do have a clear chance to sort of run this back. I think that the NFC is much weaker than the AFC, and they have the best roster potentially in the league, but definitely in their conference. They're 1 year away, I would say, from having maybe not a financial crisis, but having to deal with a lot of starting to actually balance all of the big time players that they have under contract. Now, I expect the Brandon Ayuk conversation has definitely dominated a lot of the NFL offseason. I think he's going to be back next year. They're going to have 3 legitimate wide receiver weapons in Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, and their first-round draft pick in Ricky Pearsall, who was one of my favorite wide receivers coming into the draft. So all of those weapons still. George Kittle, of course, and Brock Purdy with another year under his belt, another year removed from that elbow injury where, he made a miraculous recovery, really, to be ready for week 1 of last year like he was, and now I think that he is going to be sort of fully healthy coming into the year, so I expect big things out of him. And then the Chiefs and the Ravens shouldn't be too much of a surprise either. I thought the Chiefs got better over the offseason, did lose some sort of supplemental pieces, but the key for them, as long as they have Patrick Mahomes, and as long as some of their, we've seen the distractions around some of their players that have come out during the course of the offseason, but assuming that Rashee Rice is actually there, they just drafted Xavier Worthy as well. I think I saw this morning that his car was stolen, so there's a whole lot of nonsense going on with the Chiefs, but as long as Patrick Mahomes is there, I have full faith in them. And then the Ravens as well, where they lose Patrick Queen. That was their biggest loss during the offseason, but they still have playmakers on each of the 3 levels of that defense. Lamar Jackson is still going to be an MVP candidate, and hopefully we see a little bit more of a developed wide receiver core, but we'll see about that. The second tier I have here are playoff teams with a chance for more. I have the Lions, Bengals, Bills. I did include the Cowboys and Eagles in this tier. I don't feel necessarily great about either one of them. They should make the playoffs. I would be surprised if they don't make the playoffs. And from a roster perspective, I know how much of a mess the Eagles were down the stretch of the regular season, but they bring in 2 new coordinators. I think upgrades on both sides of the ball. They did a really good job, I thought, of addressing the needs that they had in free agency, where Saquon Barkley, do I think they overpaid for him a little bit? Possibly, but definitely an upgrade over DeAndre Swift. That run game had definitely fallen off throughout the course of the season. I thought they did a good job to address their secondary as well, especially going into the draft with Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell. So I think that the Eagles should be back. The Cowboys, I don't think we're ever a total mess. And, even if you are the biggest Cowboys hater in the world, we've seen them at least make the playoffs and make the second round as well. But that's why, again, confidence level isn't sky high with them, but there is a chance for more with them. And I feel like they are in the same category where every one of these teams has some questions sort of surrounding them. The Bills with a lot of their offseason losses, but you have to believe in Josh Allen, I think. And I do feel like to some degree the Bills' losses were maybe even slightly overstated, but we'll see about that. But third tier I have confident in their playoff contention. I have the Packers, the Dolphins. I have the Bears, surprisingly enough, and the Falcons. Now, the Falcons, I feel confident in them potentially being a playoff team because the NFC South is so short. But I don't know. I felt weird having the Bears on a tier above them. I think that I'm maybe buying into the hype a little bit much with the Bears, but I do think there are a lot of positive signs with them. We've talked at length about the defense that they played down the stretch of the season to win a handful of these games, and now they have an upgraded quarterback. They have an improved wide receiver situation. The offensive line, it can be a little bit shaky at times, but a younger group that is hopefully going to develop a little bit more. I think the Bears are going to be legitimately good this year, so I think that they're definitely going to be in the playoff picture. This one, I have sort of a seesaw tier where it could make the playoffs, could be a second round exit, but I would also not be surprised if they do not make it. This is maybe where I probably should have put the Falcons, but let me know what you think. I have the Jets, the Browns, the Jaguars, the Rams, where I definitely think that these teams could be in a position where they could win a postseason game, but there are a lot of real concerns, I think, with this group where, things could go wrong. If you want to go with the Rams, who I feel like I've been a huge fan of for the past handful of years, I think that the Matt Stafford conversation sort of surrounding this is, at any point, if he gets injured, that team falls apart. Losing Raheem Morris could definitely be a really big deal for them. And the Jets are another situation where, ideally you think that their ceiling is high enough, but Aaron Rodgers, are you going to... Obviously, I don't think that anybody's expecting a 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers to be his MVP version of himself, but what kind of production can you get from the position? And I will say, as I look back at my notes here, I did realize that I forgot about the Texans, where they would be in a playoff team with a chance for more, for me at least. And then I have a little bit of a middle ground tier here, where I have the Indianapolis Colts, I have the LA Chargers, Pittsburgh Steelers, Seattle Seahawks, and Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I probably put the Cardinals in that tier as well, but I'm not super confident in them. This is just a group of teams where they're never going to be an easy out, I think, necessarily for another team, but I would be more surprised than not if they were to make the playoffs out of this group. I would probably honestly lean with the Colts as the team that could maybe sort of cause the most damage if Anthony Richardson comes back and is an effective version of himself. But, I just feel like this tier as a whole of teams is pretty mediocre, and it's not always the worst thing in the world to be mediocre in the NFL, but I don't know. I'm not a believer in the Steelers. I know that a lot of people are. I feel like they can still win 9 games this season, but I would be legitimately surprised if they were to win a playoff game, I think. Next tier here would probably consist of the Raiders, the Vikings, the Titans, the Commanders, and the Giants would be somewhere in that middle ground, but I'm not a believer in Daniel Jones. I also don't think that that was the wrong decision for them to not try and reach for a quarterback while they still have all of these other holes. I just think that the Giants are a little bit of a work in progress here, and they are maybe a year or so away, but offensive line is a mess there, and now they don't even have their best playmaker from last year in running back. I like Neighbors a lot. I've heard a lot of people talking about the idea of him winning Rookie of the Year. Is Daniel Jones going to help him generate enough stats to do so? Let me know what you think. And then I guess I would probably group the last group here of the Giants, the Broncos, the Patriots, and the Panthers at the very bottom, where these are all teams that, like I said, just have a ways to go before they can necessarily be one of the top teams. We've seen with all of these teams, other than, I guess, Dable and the Giants sort of make, and even that was only a couple years ago, a lot of head coaching changes, a lot of work to do for all of these teams. But let me know what you think on my list here. This was a little bit of a freestyled how I would group these teams together, but that is all we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. We're live every 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern, and we will be back tomorrow. Remember to like, follow, subscribe. Check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content, and we will see you tomorrow. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn it.